The Blackened Crown. Chapter 1. The King's Burden. The bells of Arendor tolled low and heavy, their iron voices echoing across the valley as though the mountains themselves mourned. Within the grand stone keep, torches flickered against the vaulted walls, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. The court gathered, nobles draped in silks and armor, priests in flowing robes embroidered with golden thread. Their eyes all turned to the dais at the far end of the throne hall, where the crown of kings rested upon a velvet cushion. It was not just any crown. The Blackened Crown. Forged in the fires of a forgotten age, said to have been quenched in blood rather than water, its dark metal bore scars of battles long past. The gems embedded within it no longer shone with brilliance but smoldered faintly, as if some inner fire stirred restlessly. It was a relic of power, of legacy, and of curse. The young king-to-be approached. Alaric, son of Eldrin, last of the Silver Line. His father's body had been laid to rest only 7 days before, the pyres still remembered in the acrid air. Alaric's face was pale, not merely from grief, but from the weight of the moment. His hands trembled slightly, though he hid it by clenching them into fists. He had been raised to rule, taught diplomacy, swordplay, and the histories of his people, but nothing could have prepared him for the burden of that crown. The high priest stepped forward, voice echoing through the chamber. "By the will of the gods, by the blood of kings, and by the oath of your ancestors, you shall wear the crown of Arendor. May its weight remind you of duty, its strength remind you of sacrifice." The words were ritual, but the silence that followed was thick, uneasy. Even the most faithful priests hesitated when their gaze lingered too long upon the crown. There were tales, whispered in corners, spoken only by those bold or foolish enough, that the crown whispered back. The priest lifted it with trembling hands. For an instant, Alaric thought he heard a hiss, like metal upon stone. Then the weight pressed upon his brow, heavy, colder than he imagined. A chill spread down his spine. He gritted his teeth, keeping his composure as the nobles knelt before him. "All hail, Alaric, King of Arendor!" The hall thundered with voices. Trumpets blared. Yet beneath the roar of celebration he thought he heard something else. A whisper, so faint, so fleeting he could almost believe it was his imagination. "Do you feel it?" He stiffened, eyes darting. The voice was not outside. It was within. The weight is not stone, not metal. It is history. It is blood. And it is yours now. He swallowed hard, forcing a smile as he raised his hand to quiet the hall. The court saw confidence. They did not see his pulse hammering in his throat. He gave the words he had rehearsed 1,000 times. Oaths to protect, to rule with justice, to bring peace. The crowd cheered. Yet all the while the whisper remained, curling like smoke in the corners of his mind. That night, when the feast had ended and the torches burned low, Alaric sat alone in the king's chamber. The crown lay upon the table beside him. He could not bear to wear it, and yet he could not stop staring at it. The gems glimmered faintly in the firelight as though they pulsed with breath. He poured himself wine, but his hand shook, spilling crimson across the table. He cursed under his breath. His father had been strong, unshakable even in age. Would the court see him as weak? Would his enemies beyond the borders sense hesitation in his rule? They already do. The whisper again, louder this time, more certain. He froze, the cup halfway to his lips. "Who's there?" Silence, save the crackle of fire. Yet he knew the truth. The voice had come not from the room, but from the crown. He should have felt fear. Instead, there was relief. As though at last, someone understood. They smile at you, bow to you, toast your name. But behind their eyes, they measure your worth. They weigh your crown against their ambition. Do you not see it? Alaric's chest tightened. He thought of Lord Veyron, whose gaze lingered too long upon the throne, of Lady Selene, whose family commanded half the eastern armies, of the guildmasters whispering in shadows. He had told himself his doubts were paranoia, but the crown, no, the voice, confirmed what he had feared. "What do you want from me?" Alaric whispered. "Only what you want for yourself. Power, stability, eternity. I am not your enemy, Alaric. I am your ally. I am the crown." The words slithered through him, at once terrifying and intoxicating. He pressed his palms against his eyes as though to block it out, but when he lowered them, the crown glowed faintly, shadows pooling around it like ink. He should cast it aside, he thought, lock it away. Yet his hand reached out trembling and touched the cold metal. The whisper became a sigh of satisfaction. "Yes. Together, we will make them kneel." Alaric jerked back, but the connection was made. Already he felt its presence sinking deeper, like roots winding into soil. He staggered to the bed, sleep clawing at him despite his resistance. He collapsed, drifting into a restless slumber. In his dreams, he stood upon a field of bones. The sky burned crimson, and 1,000 faceless soldiers knelt before him. Upon his head, the crown blazed like a black sun, and from his lips came words he did not understand, yet felt were true. "This kingdom is mine, and mine alone." He awoke, drenched in sweat, the echo of the words still ringing in his skull. The dawn's light crept through the windows, gentle, golden, but it brought no comfort. The blackened crown sat where he had left it, waiting, watching, and deep within its silent metal, the whisper smiled. Chapter 2. The Lone Path. The desert wind howled like a starving beast, carrying with it the sting of powdered glass and the bitter taste of ash. The wanderer trudged forward, his boots sinking into dunes of rust and grit. Around his neck, a scarf the color of smoke fluttered, shielding his mouth from the poison-laden air. He had been walking for hours, maybe days. Time was a broken clock in the wastelands. He stopped at the crest of a dune and looked out across the dead horizon. Jagged skeletons of buildings pierced the sky, half buried by decades of sandstorms. A rusted billboard bent sideways, its faded paint barely legible. "Drink pure, life in a bottle." The irony was not lost on him. Pure water had become rarer than gold, and men killed for a single drop. The wanderer adjusted the strap of his pack. Inside were the meager remains of his life: a canteen half filled with brackish water, a knife sharpened on stone, a battered revolver with only 3 bullets left, and a tattered notebook filled with words no one else would ever read. Survival was not chance. It was discipline, and he lived by 3 rules. Rule 1. Never take more than you need. Greed was a poison worse than radiation. He had seen it too many times. Men hoarding food until it rotted, killing their own brothers for an extra mouthful. The wastelands punished the greedy swiftly. Rule 2. Never betray. Trust was fragile. Yet even in a broken world, betrayal was the one sin he would not forgive. Long ago he had trusted a man who led him into an ambush. The wanderer survived. The betrayer did not. Rule 3. Never stop moving. To linger was to invite death. Raiders hunted the weak, beasts prowled the ruins, and storms could bury entire towns in a single night. Those who stayed too long in one place ended up as bones in the sand. The sun scorched the earth as he descended the dune. His throat ached for water, but he ignored it. To drink too soon was weakness. He would ration every drop until the horizon offered something better. Hours later, he came across the remnants of a gas station. Its roof had collapsed, the pumps were nothing but rust, and the windows shattered long ago. Still, he pushed open the door, the creak echoing like a scream in the silence. Inside, dust coated every surface. Shelves lay toppled, their contents looted decades before. But in the corner, beneath the wreckage of a cooler, he found a can. Label faded, but intact. He opened it with the edge of his knife. beans. Dry, stale, but edible. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were a feast. Food was not just fuel. It was memory. He remembered his daughter's small hands grabbing at plates, her laughter as she spilled porridge across the table. The memory stung, but he let it linger. Pain reminded him he was still human. As night approached, the wanderer built a small fire with broken wood and scraps of paper. Flames flickered weakly, casting long shadows against the ruined walls. He sat with his back to the entrance, revolver within reach. The wastelands did not allow rest without caution. From the darkness came a sound, a shuffle of feet, faint but deliberate. He froze, listening. The fire crackled. A figure appeared in the doorway, small and frail, barely more than a child. The boy's ribs showed through his skin, his eyes hollow with hunger. The wanderer's hand hovered over his revolver, but he did not draw. Instead, he tossed the boy the empty can. "Eat what's left," he said in a voice rough from silence. The boy devoured it, licking the tin clean. Then, without a word, he vanished into the night. The wanderer watched him go, knowing he would likely not survive another week. But mercy was not weakness. It was the last thread of his soul he refused to sever. When dawn broke, he kicked dirt over the ashes of the fire, slung his pack across his shoulder, and resumed his endless march. The lone path stretched before him, endless and merciless. And still, he walked. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past Night was when the wastelands truly came alive. The heat of day gave way to a cold that could cut through bone, and the silence stretched so deep that even a breath sounded like thunder. The wanderer crouched by the remains of a broken wall, his back pressed against the stone as a small fire flickered at his feet. The flames licked upward, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. He stared into them, and as always the past came crawling back. He had not always been the wanderer. Once he had been a husband, a father, a man with a name spoken softly by someone who loved him. But that man had burned with the cities when the world ended. He pulled the tattered notebook from his pack and opened it carefully as though it were scripture. The pages were filled with sketches, scraps of words, half-finished thoughts. At the very back was a drawing, childlike and simple. A stick figure with a wide smile, holding the hand of a smaller one. His daughter had drawn it, years before the firestorms. Her name was Lena. Just saying it in his head was enough to split his chest open. He closed his eyes and the memories bled in unbidden. The day the bombs fell, the sky turned into fire. He remembered grabbing Lena's hand, running through streets filled with screams, the ground splitting beneath them as buildings collapsed. His wife, her face already fading in his mind, had been right behind him, but then came the roar, the flash, and the silence. When he woke, there was only ash. Lena lay beside him, her small hand limp in his. He had carried her for miles, refusing to accept what the silence of her body meant. Days passed before he buried her beneath a tree that no longer bloomed. He marked the grave with a broken toy she had loved. He never found his wife's body. Sometimes he wondered if she had lived. Sometimes he prayed she hadn't. The crack of wood in the fire pulled him back to the present. His jaw clenched. He had promised himself he would not drown in the past. But the wastelands had a cruel way of prying open wounds that never healed. From the darkness came the faint howl of a beast, long and guttural. His hand instinctively reached for the revolver. Shadows shifted at the edge of the firelight, but none approached. He remained still, eyes scanning the dark until the sounds faded. When the night was quiet again, he whispered into the flames, his voice broken and raw. "I walk because you can't. I fight because you couldn't. I live because someone has to." The fire crackled in reply as if mocking his confession. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, dreams dragged him back into the past. He saw Lena's smile, her arms outstretched, running toward him through a field of green, green that no longer existed in this world. But as he reached for her, the vision twisted. Her eyes turned hollow, her mouth opened in a scream, and she dissolved into ash between his fingers. He woke with a start. The notebook clutched tightly to his chest. The sky above was paling with dawn. Another day in the wastelands, another mile on the endless road. He tucked the notebook back into his pack, tightened the strap, and stood. His face was hard again, the mask restored, but inside the shadows lingered. The wanderer walked on, carrying ghosts with every step. And though the world had forgotten what it meant to grieve, he had not. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The wastelands had a way of whispering warnings long before danger showed itself. The air grew heavier, the silence sharpened, and even the winds seemed to pause in uneasy anticipation. The wanderer felt it now, deep in his bones, as he walked along the shattered remains of an old highway. Cracks ran like veins through the faded asphalt, and weeds, mutated, gray, and sharp, pushed up defiantly between them. He kept his scarf pulled tight against the dust, his revolver resting loosely at his side, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had learned long ago that the wastelands rarely gave second chances. The gathering clouds above, heavy and swollen with storm, mirrored the storm he felt rising in his own chest. Something was coming. For 3 days he had followed faint signs, boot prints pressed into the dirt, smoke plumes that vanished into the sky, remnants of burned-out camps. At first he thought them raiders, the usual predators that stalked the weak. But soon he realized the trail was larger, more organized. Whoever left it moved with purpose, not chaos. On the 4th morning, he crested a hill and froze. Below him stretched a camp sprawling across the ruins of an old stadium. Makeshift tents rose like tumors, stitched together with tarps, cloth, and scavenged steel. Fires burned in pits, their smoke curling into the air, while crude banners flapped in the wind. Black cloth daubed with a crimson symbol. A jagged crown split down the middle. Men and women moved below, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They carried weapons scavenged from every corner of the old world, rusted rifles, jagged machetes, sharpened rebar. And at the heart of it all, seated on a throne built from bones and twisted iron, was a man larger than life, the warlord. His name, the wanderer would later learn, was Kale, but in the whispers of survivors, he was called the Butcher of Ashfall. Kale was a mountain of a man, his body covered in scars and crude armor forged from car doors and metal plates. His face was half hidden by a jagged mask of steel, but his eyes burned through the gaps, bright, wild, and full of cruel certainty. In one hand he held a war axe, its edge blackened, its blade chipped from too many kills. As the wanderer watched from above, Kale stood and raised his weapon high. A roar erupted from the crowd below, a chorus of savagery echoing through the ruins. He shouted words the wanderer could not hear, but the meaning was clear. Conquest, blood, submission. The wanderer's jaw tightened. He had seen men like Kale before, tyrants rising from the ashes, feeding on fear, building thrones from bones. And he knew what followed. Villages burned, children enslaved, hope shattered. The storm in his chest grew heavier. That night, as darkness cloaked the wastelands, the wanderer slipped silently down into the outskirts of the camp. He moved like a shadow, every step measured, every breath controlled. His knife glinted faintly in the moonlight. He found the prisoners first. Behind a wall of broken chain link, half collapsed but reinforced with scavenged wood, sat a group of huddled survivors. Men, women, even children. Faces hollow with hunger, eyes empty with despair. Some bore fresh wounds, others the burns of fire or the marks of chains. A child, no older than Lena had been, lifted her head and met his gaze. For a heartbeat, the wanderer faltered. The fire in her eyes was dim, but it was not gone. It was the same fire he had once seen in his daughter. He stepped forward, whispering through the fence. "Stay quiet." The child nodded. He worked quickly, cutting the wires loose with his knife, but before he could finish, a torchlight swept across the ruins. Voices barked in the distance. "Patrol!" he hissed, pulling back into the shadows. 3 men approached, laughing harshly, rifles slung across their backs. Their footsteps crunched against gravel as they drew closer. The wanderer pressed himself into the darkness, his knife ready. The first man passed within arm's reach. Without hesitation, the wanderer struck. A quick slash, silent and precise, and the man crumpled. The second turned in confusion, only to find a blade in his throat. The third managed to shout, but before the sound carried, the wanderer grabbed his revolver and fired once. The crack echoed through the night. The prisoners stirred in terror, some crying out. The wanderer cursed under his breath. The camp was awake now. Shouts erupted. Torches flared. The warlord's men swarmed like ants disturbed from their nest. The wanderer finished cutting the fence, ushering the prisoners out into the night. "Run. Stay low. Don't stop." Some hesitated. Others stumbled forward. The child lingered for a moment, her eyes locked on him, then whispered, "Thank you." The wanderer gave a curt nod before shoving her along. "Go." As the last of them slipped into the night, the wanderer turned to face the oncoming storm. Cale emerged from the chaos like a god of war, his massive frame illuminated by the glow of fire. His axe gleamed, dripping with fresh blood. His voice bellowed across the ruins, deep and commanding. "Who dares take from me? Who dares defy the crown of ash?" The wanderer stepped into the open, his revolver steady in his hand, his knife gleaming in the other. His scarf fluttered in the hot wind, his shadow stretching long behind him. "I don't kneel to crowns," he said, his voice low but cutting through the noise. The camp fell silent for a moment, the air heavy with anticipation. Then Cale laughed, a booming, thunderous sound that rattled the ruins. "A lone rat in my house?" the warlord sneered. "You'll make a fine example." He raised his axe and charged. The wanderer fired once, twice, the bullets slamming into Cale's chest armor. The warlord staggered but did not fall. With a roar, he swung his axe in a deadly arc. The wanderer dove aside, the blade biting deep into the concrete where he had stood. They clashed in the flickering firelight, steel against steel, strength against survival. The wanderer moved fast, striking with precision, each blow aimed to wound, to slow. But Cale was relentless, his size and fury overwhelming. A backhanded strike sent the wanderer sprawling, blood filling his mouth. His revolver skittered across the ground. Kyle loomed above him, axe raised high for the killing blow. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. The wanderer's gaze flicked to the prisoners fleeing in the distance, to the child glancing back one last time. He thought of Lena, of the promise he had whispered into the flames. With a surge of will, he rolled aside just as the axe came crashing down. Grabbing a jagged shard of metal from the ground, he drove it into Cale's side. The warlord roared in pain, staggering back. The wanderer retrieved his revolver, aimed at Cale's exposed face, and pulled the trigger. The final bullet struck true, shattering the warlord's mask. Cale reeled, blood pouring, his eye blazing with hate. But before he could recover, the storm above finally broke. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the ruins, and rain, acidic and burning, began to pour. The wanderer used the chaos to vanish into the storm, his body battered, his soul burning with resolve. The warlord was wounded, but not dead. The wastelands had a new tyrant rising, and the storm was only beginning. Chapter 5. The Last Fire. The wastelands had never been silent. Even in its stillest hours the earth groaned under the weight of ash and the winds carried whispers of the dead. But on this night the silence was different, heavy, expectant, as if the broken world itself waited for the final spark that would either fade into darkness or blaze into something eternal. The wanderer stood at the edge of the ruined settlement known as Emberhold. Once it had been a mining town, its tunnels running deep into the earth. Now it was nothing more than a husk. Collapsed roofs, skeletal beams, and the hollow echo of lives long gone. Yet tonight it was more than ruins. Tonight it was a line in the sand. Behind him, survivors huddled. The same men, women, and children he had freed from Cale's camp now looked to him with eyes full of fear, and something more dangerous, hope. They had nowhere else to go, and he had nowhere left to run. The storm from nights past had passed, but its scars remained. The ground steamed where the acidic rain had eaten into stone and flesh. The wanderer's arm was bandaged crudely, his ribs still ached from Cale's blows, and every step carried the weight of exhaustion. But in his chest, beneath the pain, burned a fire that would not go out. He had promised Lena once, in a voice cracked by grief, that he would keep walking until he found meaning again. Now, in the faces of these survivors, he had found it. The butcher of Ashfall was coming, and the wanderer would meet him here. At dawn, the first horns sounded. The warlord's army marched like a tide of steel and rage. Dozens became hundreds, banners of the jagged crown rising above them. Makeshift armor glinted in the pale light, and weapons of every kind caught the morning sun. Blades, rifles, clubs of iron and bone. At their head rode Cale. His shattered mask had been replaced by a crown of twisted metal fused to his flesh, his face a ruin of scars and fury. His wounds had not slowed him. They had only fed his legend. The army chanted his name, their voices crashing like thunder. The wanderer stood alone before the gates of Emberhold, a lone shadow against the tide. His revolver hung at his side, his knife sheathed at his belt. But more than steel, it was the fire in his eyes that made the survivors believe he could hold the line. Cale raised his axe, pointing it at the lone figure. His voice rolled across the ruins like an avalanche. The rat lives. Tonight, we end his defiance. Tonight, the wastelands bow. The horde roared in answer. The wanderer whispered beneath his breath, not to Cale, but to Lena. Watch me now. This is my last promise. The first wave came fast. Raiders rushed forward howling, their blades flashing. The wanderer's revolver barked fire, each bullet finding its mark. He moved with deadly precision, never wasting a step, never wasting a shot. One fell, then another, then 5. But still they came. When the bullets ran dry, he drew his knife. The fight became brutal, primal. Steel clashed against steel, blood sprayed against dust. He ducked, struck, twisted, using every ounce of skill carved into him by years of survival. His body screamed with pain, but his spirit blazed brighter with each kill. Behind him, survivors began to fight too. Inspired by his stand, they picked up rusted tools, broken boards, scavenged weapons. The settlement became a fortress of desperation, every man and woman fighting not for themselves alone, but because the wanderer had shown them how to stand. Still, the tide pressed on. By midday, the ground was littered with bodies, the air thick with smoke and blood. The wanderer's face was smeared red, his breath ragged. Yet he did not fall. Kyle watched from afar, his fury building. At last, with a roar, he drove his beast forward, axe raised high. The final clash had come. Cale dismounted with a crash, his massive boots shaking the earth. He towered over the wanderer, his axe dripping crimson. "You should have stayed hidden," the warlord growled. "Now your death will feed my crown." The wanderer wiped blood from his lip, lifted his knife, and met the giant's gaze without fear. "I don't fight for crowns." He paused, his voice steady despite the exhaustion dragging at his body. "I fight for fire." Kyle laughed, a sound like grinding metal, and swung his axe. The wanderer met him with everything he had. The duel was thunder and flame. The axe crashed down like lightning, each strike shattering stone, each swing meant to end a life. The wanderer dodged, parried, struck with speed, but Cale's strength was monstrous. Blow after blow drove him back until the ground beneath them cracked and bled dust. Finally, Cale caught him with a backhanded strike, sending him sprawling across the dirt. The wanderer gasped, blood filling his mouth, ribs breaking under the impact. His knife lay just out of reach. Cale loomed above, axe raised high. Die, knowing you saved nothing. But in that moment, the wanderer's hand brushed something else, an old lantern, cracked but still filled with oil. His eyes burned with sudden clarity. The last fire. With a final surge of strength, he smashed the lantern at Cale's feet. Flames roared upward, clinging to the warlord's armor. Cale bellowed in rage, flailing as fire devoured him. The wanderer staggered to his feet, every bone screaming. He knew what came next. The oil spread, flames racing along the ground, catching the bodies, the banners, the makeshift weapons. The fire leapt higher, feeding on ruin, until the entire battlefield blazed like a second sun. The wanderer stumbled into the heart of the inferno, knife in hand, and drove it deep into Cale's chest. The warlord roared one final time, then collapsed, consumed by fire. The wanderer fell with him. When the flames died at last, the wastelands were silent again. The horde was shattered, scattered by fire and fear. Emberhold still stood, though blackened by ash. And among the survivors, a new story was born. They buried what little remained of the wanderer at the heart of the ruins, beneath a stone marked with no name. He had never given them one. But in the days and years that followed, whispers spread. They spoke of a man who walked the wastes with fire in his heart, who stood against the tide, who gave his life so others could live. They called him many things: the shadow of ash, the last fire, the wanderer who became a legend. And when children asked their mothers if hope still lived in the wastelands, they pointed to the horizon and said, "Yes, because he walked there once.